right. There was a time when I used to think that being successful, being good in this world meant that I had to be unique, that I had to be original in some way. And you see that in some movies. I don't know, a while ago there was a movie called Beautiful Mind. It's about a mathematician. And his strive was to be original. That was his big thing. I have to be original. But over time, I've come to realize that it's hard to be original. Even last night, when a bunch of us were meeting about one particular English ministry, the topic got to the idea of the internet, with everybody having all the knowledge that they can easily find on the internet. You can find anything on the internet. And I doubt if we'd actually find anything that we can think of that someone else hasn't already said. Now, I didn't just make that up. We also know that because God tells us from the Bible that there is nothing new under the sun. Right? Maybe there are small variations of the same thing, but there really isn't anything new. So I started wondering, what if living a victorious life, living a life where we can be victorious over the bad things in life, doesn't really depend on how talented you are or how unique you are? What if it doesn't really depend on that, but it depends much more on what voice you listen to? Because everything that there is under the sun is already out there. And there are voices that speak to us. And it really depends on what voices we listen to, whether or not we have victory in our lives. And I really begin to think that is more true than we realize. If you think about the big news that happened in the last little while in Toronto, Alec Minassian, I wonder what voices did he listen to when he did what he did? When he was struggling, what voices was he listening to? When he was online in the chat rooms, in the incels movement, I assume many of us have read the news and heard about that, right? That he was a participant on certain online groups, which has a label called incels. They call themselves incels, which means involuntarily celibate, right? And there was a lot of voices there. And which voices was he listening to being online? Right? I thought about, what about the policeman that everybody praised, the one who didn't shoot, the one that also made a good part of Toronto famous. If Alec Minassian made Toronto famous for a bad thing, he made Toronto famous in the same incident for a good thing. What voices was he listening to? That he did his job properly. And what about those who went into the neighborhood afterwards to try to contribute to healing? People who went to the neighborhood on the very same spot and started praying. And one pastor that I know was praying on the spot there, and a group, with a few of the believers from his church, and people started gathering, just spontaneously. People who were walking by just started joining them in prayer. What voice were they listening to when they decided, let's just go and pray? What voice were they listening to for those who went and laid flowers? For another pastor friend of mine who decided, let's have 24 days of music, one day for each one of the victims, the 10 who were killed and the 14 who were injured. What voices were they listening to when they say, let us heal instead of condemn? Let us help each other comfort in God's comfort instead of complaining about the state of affairs of this world and this city. What voices were they listening to? And today's passage makes it really clear. See, it starts off with, dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. Now, it's easy to interpret this as, well, when you run into this, evil spirits who would possess people. And by the way, that does happen. I know of cases that's actually happening right now that we're praying for, that it happens right here in the city, right? And so right, that does happen. It's easy to think of it as, those unusual things. where people are possessed, where houses, strange things are happening in houses. And just like in the movies, and I tell you, it really does happen. Okay? It's happening right here in our city, so it's very real. But that's not the only thing this is talking about. Testing the spirits talks about far broader than that. You know why? Because the verse continues with this. Test the spirits to see whether they're from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. So when John's saying test the spirit, it's not just when you run into some manifestation of an evil spirit, of a possession or something like that. He said, false prophets. There are many people who are saying all kinds of things, purporting to be a good message, even a message from God. But test them. He's not talking about necessarily supernatural things happening with evil spirits, but he's talking about things that sound ordinary. When people try to tell you things, you see, do not believe every spirit. That says that the spirits are trying to convince you of something. The spirits are trying to get you to believe in something. They're trying to talk to you. How? Through false prophets. There are true prophets who are bearing a message from God, and there are false prophets who are just bringing you a message from the world. And that's what John is talking about. Right? He's simply talking about what voices are you listening to? What voices are you believing in? Some of these voices may be supernatural. Some of these voices may sound perfectly human. It may just sound like something from a teacher, something from a friend, something from a reporter, something from an opinion piece in the newspaper, something from an internet forum. Which ones are good, which ones are not? We have to discern. We have to try to understand what this is about. I remember I was reminded the other day of something that I almost forgotten about. When I first came to Canada, I remember I was only 13, I just turned 14 two weeks after I came to Canada. That was a long time ago, and some of you know how many years. However, thinking back, there was one incident that after all these years, I have not forgotten. I will say it's more than 40 years. After 40 years, I have not forgotten when I first came to Canada. And it hit me how much I listened to certain voices that were speaking to me when I was young. I was only 14. I remember meeting a new friend. We immigrated to London, Ontario. Not a lot of Chinese people in that place. Okay, so I had a Caucasian friend who was very nice, who befriended me. And I don't know why, because maybe he just felt like, hey, I got to show some care to this newcomer, whose English wasn't very good and who didn't understand the culture. Even the English words that I understood, a lot of times I couldn't figure out what they meant because there was a cultural background that you need to have, and I didn't know any of it, right? So maybe he felt that, let's just be nice to this new guy. So he befriended me. It's really a nice guy. But I remember one conversation I had. Somehow we got onto the topic of watches. And I mentioned that, hey, somehow the brand Rolex came up, okay? And he says he didn't know what a Rolex was, never heard of it. And my thought was, wow, what the heck? How could anyone not have heard of a Rolex being brought up in Hong Kong, right? Years later, I would go back and I would realize, wow, how brainwashed I was in terms of the materialistic life, even at the age of 13 when I left Hong Kong, that it was so ingrained in me that success equated to certain things. See, there are certain voices that speak to us all the time. And there are voices that speak to us here too in the Canadian society. In fact, the subject came up yesterday because I was actually talking to some friends, and the subject came up about the pressures that our younger generation feels. And I was at a funeral and talking to some friends, and we were talking about our kids, and the subject was about how much pressure they feel. And what reminded me of that was the fact that when I first came here, I realized Canada didn't have that kind of pressures, right? Canada did not have. I could have a friend. In fact, most of my friends back then didn't know what a Rolex was, and they were perfectly fine with it. And there was nothing wrong with that. But today, how Canada has changed. Today, we have caught up, or we have fallen backwards to be just as materialistic as many of the places in the world. See, there are voices that speak to us as individuals and as a society that changes us, that changes who we are, changes how we feel, changes how we interpret everything, changes our values. And there was and I can't help but remember also recently, a pastor told me that they had a friend, when they went to the shopping mall, they had a friend who has the ability to see spirits, to see demonic spirits. And one of the very interesting thing that they mentioned wasn't so much of a possession, but the interesting thing that was mentioned was this friend went to a shopping mall with her. And what he saw was all these spirits whispering things to the people who were there, right? Buy this, get that, you want this, you want that. That is actually how most demonic spirits work. If you've read a very interesting fictional book, but based on some really interesting spirituality by C.S. Lewis, called The Screwtape Letters, right? That's actually the strongest influence of the spiritual world on us, is that the spirits make suggestions to us, either whispering to us directly or through voices that we hear through our society, right? And this is a big issue because we all hear voices in some ways. We might think, oh, well, there's people maybe suffering from certain mental illness conditions. They hear voices. But in reality, we all hear voices. They just come in different ways, right? But it's also very real, obviously, for people who have depression. They actually hear the audible voices. Or they may not hear audible voices, but there are very strong messages and ideas that they have to deal with. Not just depression, but people with autism. They actually deal with voices all the time, and they have strategies for how to manage this stimulus that comes from inside. Which really maybe doesn't come entirely from inside, but it works from outside to our insides. So there's a lot of this is actually going on. And those voices that just whisper to us, that gives us certain desires that may not be from God, that may be mundane, but they actually perhaps have an even bigger impact on us and our communities. Voices such as, go after the materialistic things. Go after worldly success. Go be selfish. All of those things, they actually are there. Another voice that is common. Do you want to listen to a critical spirit, or do you want to listen to a spirit of appreciation? That's another voice, right? Another voice that tells us in our society, be critical. In fact, that has come along with this idea of pride and this idea of having good tastes, right? Oh, you got to have critical tastes, right? We become a critique starts with all kinds of stuff, right? Movie critiques, right? Right? Food critiques, right? There didn't used to be so much food critiques. You should, movies, and then food become a big thing, and then now you have critiques of everything. Everybody reviews everything, right? You can find reviews on Yelp, on anything, on just about anything you want, right? You can find reviews on Amazon on every product. Everybody's become a critic. It seems like that is what's promoted. A critical spirit is even promoted in our society as being sophisticated, right? And very quickly and subtly, yet powerfully, amazing, those things go together, quickly, subtly, and powerfully, our mindset has changed. Our mindset has changed to a point where being appreciative of something seems backwards. Being critical of something seems sophisticated and forward, right? And we've lost that thankfulness, we've lost that idea. And with that, cynicism becomes more fashionable than idealism, than optimism. And that is where we are. Those voices have shaped us. Which voices do we listen to? Which voices do we listen to? One of the interesting phrases, and it turned out to be a label that a famous person gave themselves, that I thought, wow, that's a really cool thing. This is from the 60s, somebody famous from the 60s. I'll see if any of you can guess this. Who said that he was an idealist with no illusions? He labeled himself an idealist with no illusions. Any guesses? I'm not a particular fan of that person because he's human. He's limited. He has just as many flaws as he has good points. So I don't want to say that I'm promoting this person, okay? But that's JFK, John F. Kennedy. He said he's an idealist with no illusions. I thought that's actually not a bad thing. That's actually a very good thing, right? And that's what we've lost with all the voices we hear, right? We become disillusioned, critical, but we've lost our idealism, right? What voices are we listening to in our lives? It's very important. And John says here, try to discern. Does that voice come from Jesus? Does that voice acknowledge that Jesus comes from God? And later on he says that Jesus is the Son of God. Does that voice acknowledge that? If that voice does, it implies something really big. It implies the fact that Jesus has the authority, right? And it implies the fact that we can trust in his promises and his commands, right? That's what it implies. It actually implies something really big about everything that God says. If a spirit acknowledges that, it's a spirit that acknowledges that Jesus has authority, and so does his promises and his commands, right? So that's what he's saying. So discern the spirits. We live in an age where we are spoken to by all kinds of spirits. And in fact, I think victory in life depends largely not on what ideas we can come up with, but actually what voices we're listening to. Because we think we're coming up with new ideas. We're not. All of our ideas have been suggested to us by the voices that we hear, right? And some of them are stupid, such as, you should know what a Rolex is. Okay? But they've all been suggested to us. There's nothing new under the sun. So be careful to discern. What voices do we listen to? Now, what is an idealist without illusions? An idealist without illusions is someone who acknowledges the problems in the world, acknowledges our own imperfections, acknowledges the fallen world, but we don't focus on the fallenness of it, but we try to focus on the good instead, right? Here's interesting thing is, John then says, we have what it takes to have victory. We have what it takes to have victory. It is possible to be an idealist without illusions, because it is possible because one very important thing is true. The one very important thing is the fact that the one who is in us is greater than the one who is in the world. You think about that. What does that mean? The one who is in us is greater than the one who is in the world. Who is the one who is in us? That would be God, the Spirit of God, who lives in us, right? Who is the one in the world? Satan. Okay? Here are the two main voices that you hear. Yet the one who is in us is greater than the one who is in the world. We have victory. We are guaranteed victory. The victory is not by someone who's out there that we have to say, oh, when he comes and when he shows up, everything will be great. No, we already have him in us. The one who is in us is greater than the one who is in the whole world, right? And we can have victory over everything that is in the world. Despite all the bad in this fallen world, we have one amazingly good thing, that God lives in us and that he can overcome the world. He has overcome the world. And sometimes those things come out in things that we don't expect. Sometimes they're easy to overlook. I'll give you a couple of incidences, a couple of things that I've experienced that was easy to overlook, but I was able to recognize it for what it was. Maybe it wasn't that easy to overlook because they were kind of miraculous. One time, when I was serving in a church, we needed simultaneous translation. Have any of you tried to do simultaneous translation? You know what that is? It's like, United Nations stuff. What is it?
I thought it was like the main speaker and then a supplementary speaker that translates right afterwards. Or is it like
No, that wouldn't be simultaneous. Okay? It's when the main speaker doesn't stop. They keep talking and you keep translating. Okay? So basically, what you have to do, you have 3 jobs. You're listening, you're interpreting, and you're talking at the same time. As you're talking, you're listening to the next thing, right? People in United Nations does that. There are those translators. It requires a lot of training to do, right? None of us could do it. We needed simultaneous translation, but it was from, I forgot what it was from. In any case, it turned out a bunch of us pastors were sitting around. I was the only one who could do those languages. Right? That had both of those. And I think it was Mandarin and Cantonese. I was the only one who could do both of those. And said, well, by default, you're it. And I don't know how to do that. So I said, okay, there's only one thing that can be done. Okay, you guys pray like crazy, and I agreed to do it only if you guys really pray hard for this and pray during the translation. So they did. Come time for the translation, I'm locked up in a little room with the sound equipment, no one else around me, but I know that a whole bunch of people have headphones that are listening to this. And the speaker is going, really good sermon. It was, passionate. It was great, which means it was also very fast. And he wasn't slowing down any because he didn't even know I was there, right? And he had no idea whether I was doing a good job or bad job, so he doesn't slow down. He's not listening to me, right? And really weird thing happened. I started talking. I'm hearing what he's saying. It just all happened. I've never been trained. I've never practiced even before that point. There was no practicing. I just said there was no point practicing. It won't do any good. So I just went up that day, prayed, and I knew people prayed for me and were praying for me. And there it was. The whole thing went off without a hitch. And my feeling was, it was like I was watching someone else do this. It was completely out of my control, right? That is, I think, an indication of the God who is in us, what he can do when it is needed. Right? There's another time when I went to preach at Pickering Chinese Baptist Church, and I was sick. And I taught Sunday school too that morning. So I really didn't have a voice. So at best I can, I tried to teach Sunday school, but barely a voice came out. So I said, everybody sit really close. I'll cover my mouth so you won't get sick, but so you can hear me. So I struggled through the Sunday school. Afterwards, I went, to worship. And in the worship, there was this inspiration. So the song starts coming on, just like Brian here, good leading. And I really wanted to sing. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not a single sound. And I'm going, how am I going to preach? So I started praying. And I said, I better not sing. So I didn't sing, and I didn't make a sound until it was time to get up to preach. When I got up, I opened my mouth, and my voice was absolutely normal. Completely normal. All the way through until after the Holy Communion, then my voice was gone again. These are clear indications of times when God wanted to show that indeed something was happening. Right? You can try to think that is a coincidence, but I really believe that it's more than that. It's too much to be a coincidence of the timing and of everything that was happening. And if you don't And if you think it's a coincidence, you try to do simultaneous translation and see how it goes. I can't even do it now. If I try to do it now, it doesn't work. I've tried afterwards, just for fun. I said, hey, that doesn't make any sense. Can I really do it? Couldn't do it. Okay? So that is more than a coincidence. Something happened. The one who is in us is greater than the one who is in the world. And there can be all kinds of miracles. However, sometimes the best thing is not a miracle. Sometimes the best thing that God can do for us is not a miracle. But because of that, miracle or not, because we know that there will be a miracle if we truly need it, we can still trust the one who is in us to lead us on the best path. We can still listen to his voice, even at those times. Because I've seen the miraculous, now I can trust that when he doesn't give me a miracle, that it's okay, right? That would make sense, wouldn't it? If you've seen the miraculous, you're actually more secure about not getting a miracle, because you know that he would give you one if you needed one, if you truly needed one. We can know that all we have to do is listen to his voice, whether he gives us a miracle or not. The one who is in us is greater than the one who is in the world. We can know that we have victory because of that. Now, interestingly, the key implication and application from all of that John draws, is that we are capable of loving one another. That's where he goes after that. After saying the one who is in us is greater than the one who is in the world, what does that mean? The one thing he goes to is love one another. You see, that seems like a big thing. See, he knew that was difficult. He knew that was not easy. You see, what makes us think we can't do it? Because obviously, he's saying, in order for you to do it, you need to remember that the one who is in you is greater than the one who's in the world. When we forget that, we will not be able to do it. When we forget that, we will not be able to love the way that we're supposed to love. But what makes us think that we can't do it? What do you think? What makes us think that we can't love one another? We can't love the people out there. What makes us think that it can't be done? What makes us think it is so hard? Selfishness. Okay, we know our own sin, right? So in other words, we put limitations on ourselves based on we say, okay, I know who I am. And that is forgetting something, right? John is saying, you're forgetting that you're not just you. There is the one who is in you, who is greater than the world, one that's in the world, right? Yeah. What else? Easy one. Difficult people, right? I can love all these people, but not that one. Oh, believe me, I've heard this so many times. I can love all these people, but not that one. And then I try to say, how about this other one? Oh, not that one either. I literally had this happen, where I tried to get someone to go do visits with me. And this person said, yeah, I can do any other one, but not that one. So when I came up with a second, proposal, well, how about this person? Oh, not that one either. 3 in a row. I came up with a third one. It was, nope, not that one either. That person never ended up coming with me to do any visits. Not one. So, difficult people. We forget. We think that we can't overcome that. And to be fair, that person's probably thinking, I'm afraid I'm going to say something stupid. I'm afraid I'm going to do something not nice, right? Which may be, out of concern for the other person as well. So it's not an evil thing necessary. But again, that person is forgetting that the one who is in them is greater than the one who's in the world. They think that they have to be able to do this, but they don't. I didn't have to think that I have to be able to have a voice on that day. I knew that I didn't have a voice, but God had a voice, right? I didn't have to think that I knew how to do simultaneous translation. God knew how, right? And that person had forgotten that they're not the one who has to overcome their selfishness, their fear, their old habits of behavior that they're afraid will do harm to the other person. If they were willing to just let God take over, they would have been fine, right? They've forgotten that. We are afraid that there may be difficult circumstances, right? And circumstances that we think we can't deal with. But wow, I can't believe how many difficult circumstances God has thrown me into, that thinking back, I do have to admit that I had no idea how to deal with it. But God was there. And God gave me something to say, gave me something to do that completely took care of the situation, right? But we forget. We are afraid. We have the one who is greater than the world in us, but we are afraid to actually use what's there. Or we are actually convinced that he's not there, right? This is what I call Satan's empty gun trick. Have you ever heard of Satan's empty gun trick? Probably not, because I made it up. You thought I was quoting this famous thing that everybody knows. No, I made it up some time ago. Here's Satan's empty gun trick, okay? Imagine this. You've got this gun that can defeat Satan, and you're pointing it at him, okay? And he knows that you can kill him. You can stop him at least, okay? That you can have victory over him. You can stop whatever he's doing because you have this weapon in your hand that's loaded. So what's his only option? Knowing that you have the weapon, right? Huh?
There's no ammo.
He won't, There is no ammo. Right, he'll convince you that there's no ammo, even though you have a loaded gun, right? He'll convince you that you don't have a bullet. And just by that, you might not fire. Just by that, you might hesitate, you might put down the gun. You might say, oh, okay, fine. If he convinces you, if you hear that voice, if you listen to the wrong voice, you'll put down the gun, or you won't use it, you won't fire. And that's Satan's only option. Know that God says we have a loaded gun. That loaded gun doesn't kill other than it stops Satan and it stops sin. That loaded gun, John says, is love. And we have the God of love, the God who is love, living inside us. We have that loaded gun. And we know that love covers a multitude of sins. And it's not just that love forgives. Love can actually stop sins. I think when Peter said love covers a multitude of sins, he actually means it can defeat a multitude of sins. Because if you read the Bible carefully, I've gone over this many times before, the opposite of sin is actually love. If you love, you will not sin, right? So the thing to stop sin is not deterrence, it is not conditioning, it is not punishment, it is not fear. None of those really stop sin, if you really think about it, right? You think about people who commit crimes, think about the times when we've sinned. Fear, none of those. Punishment, none of those stopped us. What successfully stops me, the times when I've thought about it, is love. The times when I stop myself from blowing up and getting really mad at my kids and punishing them too severely is love. The time that stops me from throwing a temper tantrum at my wife when I think she's done something wrong or that she's annoyed me wasn't that I was afraid of her or even that I was afraid of God. Was that because I loved her? That's what stopped me, right? The thing that's opposite to sin is actually love, right? That is our loaded gun. Our loaded gun is the one in us who enables us to love the way that he does. And if we use that, there is nothing Satan can do. But so Satan's only strategy is to convince us that we don't have bullets, right? That is an empty gun, okay? So Satan's trick is that he has to convince us with a different message. Rather than love, make us feel annoyed. Stir up a hatred in us. And we will not use the gun that we have. We cannot defeat him with that. When we love, a lot of idols fall. when we love, a lot of idols fall. No matter what the idol is, whether it's pride, whether it is materialism, whether it's everything, whether it's power. When we love, we come to understand a different kind of power, right? It is not the power to coerce. It is not the power by authority. It's a power to influence somebody. It's power to change somebody's heart deeply by love, right? The idol of power by authority disappears, falls when we love, right? And this is what we need. And when we think we can't, God will give us a miracle to show that He has already given us what we need, that He's already in us, that He can do it. So, for example, patience to love, right? How many people have prayed for patience? We have all prayed for patience. I'm pretty sure I've told you this before, but I'll say it again, okay? To have patience to love, the prayer for patience is answered as soon as we ask, because that request is completely in line with God's will, right? And in Jesus' name. It is a part of the fruit of the Spirit that we're supposed to bear. When we ask for patience, it's given immediately. So as soon as we ask, God already gave us the patience we need, even if it's just a little. What Satan does is he will try to tell us we don't have any patience. So go ahead and blow up. Okay? But God says, you have it. I gave it to you already, even if it's a little. I gave you enough for this situation. So use it. If you use that little patience you have, guess what happens? God gives you more as is needed. We never run out. We have an infinite supply of patience as long as we use it. The problem for us isn't that we have no patience. The problem for us is that we don't use the patience that God gives us. And so, there's no point of Him giving us more, right? He didn't give us a huge amount of patience, and we can say, oh, I have a lot of patience, I just never use it. Wait a minute. Think about that, right? If we keep praying for patience, that's what you end up saying. God gave me a lot of patience, I just never use it. Well, then there's no difference than having no patience, right? But if you start to use a little bit of patience that God has given you, guess what? God gives you more and more and more. The same with love. If you start telling yourselves, this is too difficult for my love, I can't love that way, and you don't use the love that God has already given you because He lives in you, you don't use it, then guess what? You will feel like you have no love to give, even though you could be full of love, God's love in you. But use it. The more you use it, the more you will have. Right? Our annoyance is really nothing more than Satan's empty gun trick. Right? Annoyance is simply telling ourselves that we've run out of patience and we've run out of the ability to accept another's faults. Therefore, we've run out of love. Right? We get annoyed easily. That's an everyday thing. Okay? We all feel it. Is there anyone here who doesn't feel annoyed at one time or another? Put up your hand. Well, seriously? Yeah, only Lawrence. Okay. We have felt annoyed at one time or another in our lives. Okay, and we already have all that it takes. We want to look for this infinite supply of patience, infinite supply of love. It can be ours. It's already in us. Use it, and we'll keep getting more. There's a big display at the AGO that everyone wants to get into to see, and nobody can get tickets. You know what it is? Anyone heard of it? The Art Gallery of Ontario. It's by an artist called Kusawa, a Japanese lady. She's really old now, I think, in her 90s. And it's called Infinity Mirrors. Okay? Lots of people want to go see it. It's actually, I would think it's rather disappointing because they're in these rooms with mirrors, and you get to go in, and it looks like an infinite, distance and stuff like that. But you only get to go in the room for here's the irony. You get to go into the room for 20 seconds. At 15 seconds, they knock on the door to get you out. And this is supposed to be the experience of infinity. Okay? And you're rushed out, right? But the fact that the tickets get sold out, people try to go and they can't, it tells us we are looking for the infinity, right? There is something in us that says we look for something infinite. Guess what? The one who is in us is greater than the one who is in this world. We have what is infinite. We have infinite patience. We have infinite love if we care to actually use it. And we can have victory in life by the one who is in us if we actually start to use what he provides for us, this infinite supply of all good things. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for being here, not just among us, but being in us. And using John's words to remind us that you who are in us is greater than the one who is in the world. In fact, you who are in us is greater than the world. And we can have victory by the one who is already in us. And you supply us with the infinite supply of good things that we need, like patience and love and gentleness. And if we care to use it, humility and all the good things. Father, help us to always hear the right voice. Thank you for asking us once again to consider what voice are we listening to in our lives. Lord, help us to pick and choose carefully, to discern what voice we want to listen to. And hopefully, by listening to your voice, the voice of the Good Shepherd, we come to have victory in every area of our lives through the one in us who is greater than the one in the world. And with that we can make all the idols in our lives fall. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Now's the time for the Holy Communion. Let us take the time now. As God's word says, we are to come to the table by first examining ourselves. So let us bow. Let's take a time to examine